In the small, bustling town of El Dorado Springs, where whispers traveled faster than the wind and secrets were as thick as the jungle mist, there lived a woman named Amara. She was known for her grace, intelligence, and an unshakable sense of justice that made her both admired and envied by those around her. But beneath her calm exterior lay scars from a past she had tried hard to bury, a past tied to her ex-husband, Kwame. Kwame was once the golden boy of the village, a charismatic man with dreams bigger than the savannah sky. Together, they had been the epitome of young love, until reality set in. Their marriage crumbled under the weight of mistrust, betrayal, and unresolved grievances. The divorce was messy, leaving behind not just broken vows, but also lingering resentment on Kwame's part. He never accepted the separation. Instead, he blamed Amara for everything that went wrong. Years passed and life moved forward, or so Amara thought. One fateful morning, as she prepared for work at her modest law firm, a summons arrived. It wasn't just any legal notice. It bore the seal of the local court and carried an accusation so absurd it left her stunned. Kwame had filed a lawsuit against her, claiming that she had used witchcraft to ruin his life. And if that wasn't shocking enough, he had brought along a witch doctor to testify in court. The news spread like wildfire through El Dorado Springs. People gathered in hushed clusters outside the courthouse, eager to witness what promised to be the trial of the decade. Some believed Kwame's claims, citing ancient traditions and superstitions deeply rooted in their culture. Others stood firmly by Amara, knowing her to be a rational, modern woman who would never dabble in such practices. Yet, the presence of the witch doctor added an air of mystique and fear to the proceedings. Amara sat in her living room, staring at the summons in disbelief. Her mind raced with questions. How could Kwame stoop so low? What did he hope to achieve by dragging her name through the mud? And most importantly, how could she possibly defend herself against something as intangible as accusations of witchcraft? Her best friend, Nia, rushed over upon hearing the news. Nia was a fiery journalist who had always been Amara's pillar of support. "This is ridiculous," Nia exclaimed, pacing back and forth. "Kwame is clearly trying to humiliate you. We need to fight this not just for your sake, but for everyone who believes in fairness and reason." "I know," Amara replied quietly, her voice tinged with frustration. "But how do I fight superstition with logic? This isn't about evidence or facts anymore. It's about fear and manipulation." Nia placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "Then we'll turn it around. If Kwame wants to play dirty, we'll expose him for who he really is. Let's start gathering witnesses, documents, anything that proves your innocence. And don't worry about the witch doctor. We'll find a way to debunk his nonsense." With renewed determination, Amara began preparing for the trial. She reached out to former colleagues, friends, and even distant relatives who could vouch for her character. Meanwhile, Nia dug into Kwame's background, uncovering skeletons he'd rather keep hidden. As the days passed, the tension in El Dorado Springs grew palpable. Everyone had taken sides, and the upcoming trial became the talk of the town. On the day of the hearing, the courtroom was packed to capacity. Villagers squeezed onto wooden benches, their eyes wide with anticipation. Reporters scribbled furiously in notebooks, while cameras clicked incessantly. At the center of it all stood Amara, dressed in a crisp navy blue suit, her posture unwavering despite the chaos surrounding her. Opposite her sat Kwame, flanked by his entourage, including the infamous witch doctor, a wiry old man draped in colorful beads and animal skins. His presence alone commanded attention, and many in the audience shifted uncomfortably in their seats, torn between curiosity and unease. As the judge entered and called the court to order, the atmosphere became electric. The prosecution presented its case first, painting Amara as a cunning sorceress who had cursed Kwame's business ventures, health, and personal relationships. The witch doctor took the stand, speaking in a low, gravelly voice about spirits, hexes, and omens. He claimed to have seen signs pointing directly to Amara's guilt, citing visions he had received during rituals performed under the full moon. Amara listened intently, her expression unreadable. Inside, however, her mind worked furiously. She knew that disproving these baseless allegations wouldn't be easy, especially when emotions ran high. But she also knew one thing for certain. Justice had to prevail, not just for her, but for the truth itself. When it was finally her turn to speak, Amara rose slowly, her eyes scanning the room. She addressed the judge, the jury, and the crowd with a calm yet powerful demeanor. "Your Honor," she began, her voice steady and clear, "what we are dealing with here is not a question of magic or curses. It is a question of integrity, accountability, and the rule of law. My ex-husband has chosen to exploit fear and ignorance to tarnish my reputation. But I am confident that the truth will shine through." And with that, she launched into her defense, presenting irrefutable evidence of her innocence and exposing the flaws in Kwame's narrative. Little did anyone know, this was only the beginning of a battle that would test not only Amara's resolve, but also the very fabric of justice in El Dorado Springs. Amara's words hung in the air like a challenge, daring anyone to refute the logic and clarity she brought to the courtroom. Her presentation was methodical, almost surgical in its precision. She started by addressing the accusations head-on, dismantling each claim Kwame had made with evidence that left no room for doubt. "Your Honor," Amara continued, her voice unwavering, "my ex-husband has accused me of using witchcraft to sabotage his life, yet he has provided no concrete evidence, only hearsay and superstition. Let us examine the facts instead." She turned to the jury, her gaze steady and sincere. "Kwame claims I cursed his business ventures. However, financial records show that his company began struggling long before our divorce. In fact, it was his own mismanagement, poor investments, unpaid debts, and reckless spending that led to his downfall. Here are the documents proving this." With that, she handed over a stack of bank statements, invoices, and audit reports to the judge and opposing counsel. The courtroom buzzed as people flipped through the papers. Even the witch doctor shifted uncomfortably in his seat, beads clinking softly against one another. Kwame's lawyer tried to object, but the judge silenced him with a sharp rap of the gavel. "Let the defendant continue," the judge said firmly. Amara pressed on. "As for his alleged health issues, medical records confirm that Kwame suffers from chronic conditions exacerbated by stress and poor lifestyle choices, not some mythical curse. His doctors have repeatedly advised him to adopt healthier habits, yet he ignored their warnings." She paused, allowing her words to sink in before delivering the final blow. "And then there's the matter of his personal relationships. My ex-husband blames me for alienating his friends and family, but the truth is far simpler. They grew tired of his arrogance, dishonesty, and refusal to take responsibility for his actions. Here are affidavits from several individuals who can attest to this." The murmurs in the courtroom grew louder. Some spectators nodded approvingly, while others exchanged skeptical glances. Kwame sat stiffly beside his lawyer, his face flushed with anger and embarrassment. For the first time, cracks were beginning to show in his carefully constructed facade. But Amara wasn't done yet. She knew that disproving the allegations wasn't enough. She needed to expose the real motive behind Kwame's lawsuit. Turning to the judge, she said, "Your Honor, this case isn't about witchcraft. It's about revenge. Kwame cannot accept that our marriage ended, nor can he face the consequences of his own failures. So, he resorted to baseless accusations, hoping to tarnish my reputation and deflect attention from his shortcomings." At this point, Nia stood up from the audience and approached the stand, carrying a folder filled with additional evidence. The judge raised an eyebrow. "Who is this woman?" he asked. "This is my friend and colleague, Nia Johnson," Amara explained. "She has uncovered information critical to this case." After a brief deliberation, the judge allowed Nia to speak. With a confident stride, Nia addressed the court. "Ladies and gentlemen, what you're witnessing today is not just an attack on Amara. It's an attempt to exploit cultural fears for personal gain. Kwame hired this so-called witch doctor not because he genuinely believes in curses, but because he knows how powerful superstition can be in swaying public opinion." Nia opened the folder and displayed photographs of Kwame meeting with the witch doctor weeks before filing the lawsuit. These images prove that this entire charade was premeditated. They met multiple times to plan their strategy, knowing full well that fear of witchcraft would overshadow reason and fairness. Gasps erupted throughout the courtroom. The witch doctor squirmed in his seat, avoiding eye contact with anyone. Kwame's lawyer whispered urgently into his client's ear, but it was too late. The damage had been done. To further drive her point home, Nia played a recording of a conversation between Kwame and the witch doctor. In it, Kwame explicitly instructed the man to exaggerate his claims and play on the villagers' superstitions. "Make them believe she's dangerous," Kwame's voice echoed through the courtroom. "We need to ruin her completely." The room fell silent, save for the soft hum of disbelief. Even the most ardent supporters of Kwame's cause shifted uncomfortably, their faith in his narrative shaken. Amara watched as her ex-husband's confidence crumbled before her eyes. It was a moment of vindication, but also one of sadness. How could someone stoop so low? When Nia finished presenting the evidence, Amara took the stand once more. This time, her tone softened, becoming almost empathetic. "I don't deny that our culture values tradition and spirituality," she said, addressing the crowd. "But we must not let fear cloud our judgment. Justice should be based on truth, not superstition. Today, I ask you to look beyond the smoke and mirrors and see this case for what it truly is. An act of desperation by a man unwilling to face reality." Her closing statement resonated deeply with many in the courtroom. As she returned to her seat, she felt a sense of peace wash over her. Whatever the verdict, she had spoken her truth, and that was all that mattered. The judge adjourned the court for deliberation, instructing the jury to weigh the evidence carefully. Outside, the townspeople debated fervently, their opinions divided. Some praised Amara for her courage and integrity, while others remained hesitant, clinging to old beliefs. Hours passed, and the tension inside the courtroom reached its peak. Finally, the judge returned, holding the verdict in his hands. All eyes turned to him as he read aloud the decision. The courtroom was deathly silent as the judge adjusted his glasses and cleared his throat. Every person in the room leaned forward, their breaths held in anticipation. Even the witch doctor, who had been fidgeting nervously since Nia's damning revelations, now sat frozen like a statue. The air felt heavy with suspense, as if the very walls of the courthouse were waiting to hear what justice would decree. After careful consideration of the evidence presented, the judge began, his voice steady and authoritative. "This court finds that the accusations against Amara are baseless and unfounded. There is no credible proof to support the claim that she engaged in any act of witchcraft or sorcery. Furthermore, it has been clearly demonstrated that these allegations were fabricated with malicious intent." A collective gasp rippled through the audience. Some clapped instinctively, while others whispered in shock. Kwame's face turned pale, his jaw tightening as he stared at the floor, unable to meet anyone's gaze. His lawyer scribbled furiously on a notepad, likely already brainstorming ways to mitigate the fallout from this disastrous verdict. The judge continued, his tone growing firmer. "This case highlights the dangers of exploiting cultural beliefs for personal gain. Superstition, when manipulated, can lead to grave injustices. It is imperative that we uphold the rule of law and ensure that our courts remain bastions of truth and fairness, not arenas for vendettas disguised as legal battles." He then addressed Kwame directly, his words cutting like a blade. "Mr. Kwame, your actions have not only wasted the time and resources of this court, but have also caused irreparable harm to Ms. Amara's reputation. You willfully sought to deceive the public and tarnish her character using fear and falsehoods. For this, you are hereby fined for defamation and ordered to issue a public apology to Ms. Amara within 7 days. Failure to comply will result in additional penalties." The gavel came down with a resounding crack, sealing the verdict. Cheers erupted from Amara's supporters, filling the courtroom with a cacophony of relief and triumph. Nia rushed to embrace her friend, tears streaming down her face. "You did it, Amara. Justice prevailed." Amara, however, remained composed, though a faint smile tugged at the corners of her lips. She stood up slowly, her eyes scanning the room one last time. Her gaze lingered briefly on Kwame, who looked utterly defeated, before she turned to leave. As she walked out of the courtroom, villagers parted to make way for her, some nodding respectfully, others murmuring words of admiration. Outside, the sun shone brightly, casting golden rays over El Dorado Springs. It was as if nature itself celebrated the victory of truth over deceit. Reporters swarmed around Amara, thrusting microphones in her face and firing questions about how she felt, what message she wanted to send, and whether she planned to take further action against Kwame. But Amara simply raised a hand, signaling for silence. "I want to thank everyone who supported me during this difficult time," she said, her voice calm yet powerful. "This case was never just about me. It was about standing up for what is right. Fear and superstition should never be tools for manipulation. We must learn to question, to seek evidence, and to trust in reason. Only then can we build a society where justice truly prevails." Her words resonated deeply, earning nods of agreement even from those who had initially doubted her innocence. As the crowd dispersed, Amara took a moment to breathe in the fresh air, feeling the weight of months of stress lift off her shoulders. For the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to feel hope, not just for herself, but for the future of her community. Later that evening, Amara sat on the porch of her modest home, sipping tea and reflecting on the day's events. Nia joined her, still buzzing with excitement. "Can you believe it? That witch doctor scam is going to be the talk of the town for years. People won't fall for nonsense like that again anytime soon." Amara chuckled softly. "Let's hope so. But change doesn't happen overnight. Today was a step forward, but there's still work to be done. Education, awareness, those are the real keys to progress." Nia nodded thoughtfully. "Well, you've certainly set an example. Maybe you should write a book or give talks about this experience. Imagine the impact you could have." Amara smiled, considering the idea. "Maybe someday. But for now, I just want to enjoy this moment of peace." As they sat together under the starlit sky, the sounds of crickets and distant laughter drifting through the night, Amara felt a profound sense of closure. The battle had been hard-fought, but she had emerged victorious. Not just because the court ruled in her favor, but because she had stayed true to her principles. Meanwhile, across town, Kwame sat alone in his dimly lit living room, nursing a glass of whiskey. The weight of his failure pressed down on him, heavier than ever. He glanced at the summons for the public apology he was required to issue, crumpled on the table beside him. Anger simmered beneath his shame, and he clenched his fists tightly. "This isn't over," he muttered to himself, though deep down he knew it was. In the days that followed, Amara's story spread far beyond El Dorado Springs. News outlets picked up the tale, framing it as a landmark case that challenged superstition and championed rationality. People from neighboring towns traveled to meet her, seeking advice on how to combat similar injustices in their own communities. Amara became a symbol of resilience and integrity, her name synonymous with courage. But perhaps the most significant change occurred within El Dorado Springs itself. Conversations about tradition and modernity, fear and reason, began to take root. Villagers started questioning age-old practices that had long gone unchallenged. Schools introduced lessons on critical thinking, and local leaders encouraged open dialogue about cultural beliefs. For Amara, life slowly returned to normal, or as close to normal as it could be after such a transformative experience. She resumed her work at the law firm, dedicating herself to cases involving marginalized individuals who lacked a voice. Her newfound fame didn't change her. Instead, it strengthened her resolve to fight for justice wherever it was needed. One evening, as she prepared dinner, a knock sounded at her door. Opening it, she found an elderly woman standing there, clutching a basket of fruit. "Ms. Amara," the woman said shyly, "I just wanted to thank you. My granddaughter was accused of witchcraft last year, and we lost everything because of it. Your bravery gives us hope that things can change." Touched, Amara invited the woman inside, listening intently as she shared her story. By the end of the visit, Amara knew exactly what her next mission would be: to establish a foundation dedicated to educating people about the dangers of superstition and providing legal aid to those wrongfully accused. And so, Amara's journey continued, not as a victim of false accusations, but as a beacon of hope and change. Justice had prevailed in the courtroom, but its ripple effects would extend far beyond, touching lives and shaping futures for generations to come. As weeks turned into months, Amara's foundation, aptly named Justice Beyond Fear, began to take shape. With the help of Nia, who had become her closest confidant and partner in this new endeavor, Amara worked tirelessly to create a platform that would not only educate but also empower those affected by superstition-driven injustices. The Foundation's mission was clear: to dismantle the barriers of ignorance and fear while fostering a culture of critical thinking and compassion. The launch event for Justice Beyond Fear was held in the heart of El Dorado Springs, drawing crowds from far and wide. Local leaders, activists, and even international journalists attended, eager to witness the unveiling of what many hoped would be a turning point for the region. A large banner hung over the stage, bearing the Foundation's motto, "Truth over tradition, reason over rumor." Amara stood at the podium, her presence commanding yet warm. She began her speech by acknowledging the challenges that lay ahead. "This is not just about fighting superstition," she said, her voice resonating through the crowd. "It's about rebuilding trust in ourselves, in our communities, and in the systems meant to protect us. We must learn to question without judgment, to seek understanding without hostility." She then shared stories of individuals who had suffered due to baseless accusations, highlighting the devastating consequences of unchecked superstition. One particularly moving account came from a young man named Kofi, who had been ostracized by his village after being labeled a sorcerer following a string of unexplained illnesses among livestock. Kofi's family had abandoned him, and he had lived in isolation until Amara's Foundation intervened, providing legal support and counseling. "These are not isolated incidents," Amara emphasized. "They are symptoms of a deeper issue, one rooted in fear and lack of education. But together, we can heal these wounds and build a future where no one has to endure such suffering." Her words struck a chord with the audience, many of whom rose to their feet in applause. Donations poured in from attendees, and volunteers signed up to assist with various initiatives, including workshops, awareness campaigns, and legal clinics. By the end of the day, Justice Beyond Fear had garnered enough momentum to begin its operations immediately. Meanwhile, Kwame struggled to rebuild his life after the humiliating defeat in court. His business had collapsed entirely, and his reputation was in tatters. Few people in El Dorado Springs wanted anything to do with him, and those who did often treated him with thinly veiled disdain. Even his family kept their distance, unable to reconcile the man they once admired with the bitter, vindictive figure he had become. Desperate to salvage what little remained of his dignity, Kwame decided to leave the village. He packed his belongings and moved to a distant city, hoping to start anew. Yet, no matter how far he traveled, the shadow of his past followed him. Nights were restless, haunted by memories of the trial and the faces of those he had wronged. During the day, he found himself avoiding mirrors, unable to face the person staring back at him. One evening, as he wandered aimlessly through the crowded streets of his new home, Kwame stumbled upon a small bookstore. Drawn by curiosity, he stepped inside and browsed the shelves. Among the titles, one book caught his eye, Breaking Free, Overcoming Hate and Finding Redemption. Intrigued, he purchased it and returned to his tiny apartment. That night, as he read the book, something shifted within him. The author, a former convict who had turned his life around, spoke candidly about guilt, forgiveness, and the power of self-reflection. For the first time in years, Kwame allowed himself to confront the truth about his actions. He realized that his lawsuit against Amara hadn't been about justice or fairness. It had been about ego, pride, and an unwillingness to accept responsibility for his failures. Tears streamed down his face as he closed the book, overwhelmed by a mix of regret and resolve. He knew he couldn't undo the harm he had caused, but perhaps he could make amends. The next morning, he wrote a letter to Amara, a sincere apology admitting his wrongdoing and expressing gratitude for the lessons her courage had taught him. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Back in El Dorado Springs, Amara received Kwame's letter with mixed emotions. Part of her felt anger and skepticism, while another part recognized the vulnerability in his words. After consulting with Nia, she decided to respond not out of obligation, but because she believed in the possibility of redemption. In her reply, she acknowledged his apology but urged him to take concrete steps toward change. True remorse, she wrote, is reflected in actions, not just words. Use this moment to grow, to contribute positively to society, and to help others avoid the mistakes you've made. Kwame took her advice to heart. Though their paths would likely never cross again, he began volunteering at a local shelter, offering his skills to support those in need. Slowly, he started rebuilding his life, not as the golden boy he once was, but as someone striving to be better. As the months passed, justice beyond hope flourished, becoming a beacon of progress in El Dorado Springs and beyond. Amara's work inspired countless others to challenge harmful traditions and advocate for rationality. Schools incorporated her teachings into their curricula, and community leaders embraced her vision of a more enlightened society. Yet, amidst all the accolades and achievements, Amara remained humble. She knew that the fight against superstition and injustice was far from over, but she also understood that every step forward mattered. Justice, she realized, was not a destination, it was a journey. And so, with unwavering determination, Amara continued her mission, lighting the way for others to follow. Years passed, and the impact of Amara's work continued to ripple outward, touching lives in ways she could never have imagined. Justice Beyond Fear had grown from a small grassroots initiative into a nationwide movement, with chapters spreading across neighboring countries. Its message of reason, education, and compassion resonated deeply, inspiring communities to confront age-old superstitions and embrace critical thinking. Amara herself became a household name, not just in El Dorado Springs but around the world. She was invited to speak at international conferences, universities, and forums, where her story served as both a cautionary tale and a beacon of hope. Her speeches were always met with standing ovations, not because they were polished or rehearsed, but because they came from a place of authenticity and lived experience. Yet, despite her growing fame, Amara remained grounded. She still lived in her modest home, waking up early each morning to tend to her garden before diving into the day's work. For her, success wasn't measured by accolades or recognition, it was measured by the number of lives touched and transformed. One crisp autumn morning, Amara received an unexpected visitor. It was Kwame. He stood awkwardly on her porch, looking older and wearier than she remembered. His once arrogant demeanor had softened into something more humble and sincere. "Amara," he began hesitantly, "I know I don't deserve your time, but I wanted to thank you. Your letter changed me. It made me realize that I couldn't keep running from my mistakes. So, I've been trying to make amends, to be better." Amara studied him for a moment, searching his eyes for any trace of the man who had once sought to destroy her. What she saw instead was vulnerability and regret. Slowly, she nodded. "Kwame, we all make mistakes. What matters is what we do after we recognize them. If you're truly committed to change, then that's something worth acknowledging." She invited him inside, and over tea, they spoke openly for the first time in years. Kwame shared how volunteering at the shelter had given him purpose and how he'd started mentoring young people, teaching them about accountability and resilience. Amara listened intently, offering words of encouragement without sugarcoating the challenges ahead. By the end of their conversation, there was no talk of forgiveness, not yet, but there was understanding. They parted ways with a quiet mutual respect, each carrying the weight of their shared history, but also the promise of new beginnings. In the years that followed, Kwame became an unlikely ally in Amara's mission. While he avoided the spotlight, he worked behind the scenes, using his own experiences to educate others about the dangers of pride and manipulation. Together, they co-authored a book titled From Shadows to Light, a journey through justice and redemption, which became a bestseller and further amplified their message. Meanwhile, El Dorado Springs underwent a remarkable transformation. The town that had once thrived on whispers and superstition now embraced open dialogue and inquiry. Schools introduced mandatory courses on critical thinking, and community leaders organized regular discussions about cultural practices, encouraging residents to question harmful traditions while preserving those that enriched their heritage. Amara's foundation played a pivotal role in this shift, funding research, hosting workshops, and providing legal aid to those wrongfully accused. Villagers who had once feared speaking out against injustice now rallied together, united by a shared vision of progress. On the 10th anniversary of Justice Beyond Fear, Amara stood on the same stage where she had launched the foundation, surrounded by supporters, volunteers, and beneficiaries. As she addressed the cheering crowd, tears glistened in her eyes. "When I first embarked on this journey," she said, her voice steady yet filled with emotion, "I never dreamed it would lead us here. But none of this would have been possible without all of you, without your courage, your determination, and your belief in a better future. Together, we've proven that justice isn't just a concept reserved for courtrooms. It's a way of life. It's about standing up for what's right, even when it's hard. It's about lifting others up, even when they've fallen. And most importantly, it's about never losing faith in the power of truth." Her words echoed through the crowd, igniting a renewed sense of purpose. People hugged one another, celebrating not just the achievements of the past decade, but the endless possibilities of the future. As the festivities wound down, Amara found herself alone on the stage, staring out at the sea of faces. In that moment, she felt a profound sense of fulfillment, not because she had achieved everything she set out to do, but because she knew the work would continue long after she was gone. Nia joined her, placing a hand on her shoulder. "You've done incredible things, Amara. The world is a better place because of you." Amara smiled softly, shaking her head. "No, Nia. The world is a better place because of us. This has never been about one person. It's about all of us working together to create change." With that, they walked off the stage, arm in arm, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The road to justice was far from over, but Amara knew they were on the right path. A path illuminated by truth, guided by compassion, and paved with the unwavering belief that justice, no matter how elusive, would always prevail in the end. And so, the story of Amara and her fight against fear and superstition became legend, a testament to the enduring power of integrity, resilience, and hope. The end.